Hey guys, tonight we slip into the dust-covered corridors of time, back to an age of marble temples and sun-baked fields, when poets sang about heroes and gods, but curiously, forgot to mention the women grinding wheat until their hands blistered. You're going to wander through the world of ancient Greece, but not the gilded version with statues and symposiums. Rather, you'll stand beside the women whose lives rarely made it into history's grand stories. Spoiler alert, you probably wouldn't survive a day of their routines, especially if the heaviest thing you usually carry is your phone charger. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know where you are listening from. Drop your location and the time of day in the comments. It's always fascinating to see this sleepy little community stretch across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in the Aegean world, maybe in Athens around the 5th century BC. The city hums with talk of philosophy, democracy, and theater, yet the voices we hear are mostly men's. Aristophanes jokes, Pericles lectures, Plato writes dialogues, but when it comes to women's work, the texts are silent or dismissive. Women appear like background scenery, weaving in corners or quietly attending festivals. Invisible in records, but essential in reality. Mainstream fact: Greek literature rarely recorded women's daily lives. Most of what we know comes from fragments, vase paintings, and the occasional grudging remark from a philosopher. Aristotle, for example, mused that women were weaker in constitution, as though that somehow excused their exclusion from civic life. Quirky tidbit: in some comedic plays, women appear not as people, but as symbols of chores, like living metaphors for weaving or cooking. It's as if a playwright looked at his wife, thought, personified laundry basket, and put that on stage. Historians still argue whether this invisibility was deliberate erasure or simply the result of male writers ignoring what they saw as ordinary. After all, who wants to write an epic about blistered hands and tired backs? Yet ironically, without that labor, the epics themselves might not have existed. The writers had to eat, wear clothes, and live in houses built and sustained by those same invisible workers. Picture yourself wandering into an Athenian home. You see men debating in the courtyard, voices echoing, while tucked away in shadowed rooms, women bend over grindstones. Their lives don't make the inscriptions carved in stone, but their labor fuels the very men who leave their names for history. Joke 1. Imagine if future archaeologists judged our society only by Marvel movies. They'd think women rarely existed unless they were superheroes in spandex. Ancient Greece kind of did the same. The invisibility extends beyond texts. Legal documents mention women mainly in terms of property, dowries, inheritances, or in connection to male guardians. Their work? Assumed unworthy of parchment. Yet archaeologists keep uncovering the tools, loom weights by the hundreds, grinding stones worn smooth, broken amphorae that once carried water. Silent artifacts of constant motion. Quirky tidbit: some tombstones depict women not as warriors or thinkers, but with their best loom, as if weaving was their eternal resume. Here lies so-and-so, spinner of thread, carved for eternity. Joke 2. You know your job is underappreciated when your headstone basically reads, "Excellent laundry folder." Historians debate how much freedom women had between regions. In Sparta, women owned more land, had more visibility, and were sometimes noted for their athleticism. But even there, much of their daily reality was hidden behind the curtain of official accounts. In Athens, meanwhile, the so-called cradle of democracy, women had fewer rights than many slaves. Some scholars argue that indivisibility was a deliberate political choice. The democracy needed women's labor, but not their voices. So, as you drift deeper into this story, keep in mind, the suffering wasn't always loud or spectacular. It was hidden, quiet, and constant. The kind that slips under the radar but shapes every brick of society. Joke 3. If the Olympics had an event for carrying amphory while wrangling toddlers, ancient Greek women would have swept the medals. Unfortunately, no one thought to record that event. Here, in the silence of overlooked lives, lies the hidden suffering. You won't read it in Homer's verses or hear it from marble statues. But it's there, lingering like background music, always playing, always necessary, even when no one bothered to write down the tune. The roosters stir in the gray Aegean dawn, though honestly, you don't have the luxury of ignoring them with a pillow over your head. You rise before the men of the household, because there is no sleeping in when the fields await. The faint light of torches flickers against stone walls as you wrap yourself in a plain woolen cloak and step into the chill. Mainstream fact: in much of rural Greece, women were expected to contribute heavily to agricultural labor. They planted, weeded, and harvested, especially in small farms where the family's survival depended on every able body. While men might handle plowing or military service, women were responsible for a staggering amount of fieldwork, often balancing it with household duties. Picture it: women bent over rows of barley, hands brushing cool dew from stalks, the horizon beginning to glow gold. A basket slung against the hip, a wooden hoe biting into dry soil, and the rhythm of work starting before breakfast. And always, the sound of sandals scuffing against dirt, punctuated by the bleating of goats. Quirky tidbit: archaeologists studying ancient skeletons have found that Greek women's bones often show evidence of repetitive strain, shoulders hunched from carrying loads, knees worn down by constant bending. In short, if you were an ancient Greek woman, your skeleton aged faster than your birthday candles. Historians still argue how much of this labor was seasonal versus year-round. Some scholars suggest that women's fieldwork was heaviest during harvest and planting, while others believe their contribution was constant and underrecorded. Regardless, it's clear their hands were as calloused as any farmer's, though the poets sang only of heroic plowmen. Joke 1. If you've ever grumbled about mowing the lawn in summer, try harvesting barley for hours in a wool tunic. Ancient women would laugh at your complaints, and then hand you another basket. The early morning also meant tending vines, watering gardens, or gathering herbs for cooking and medicine. Agriculture wasn't just crops, it was survival. And if you were unlucky enough to marry into a poorer household, you might also rent yourself out to wealthier farms during peak seasons, laboring for others while your own family waited at home. Quirky tidbit: some vase paintings actually show women in fields alongside men, but for centuries, historians dismissed these as decorative. Only recently have scholars re-examined them, recognizing they likely reflect reality. Women sweating alongside husbands, brothers, and sons. Joke 2. Imagine someone painting you hard at work on a giant vase, only for future generations to say, "Ah yes, a purely symbolic decorative motif." Talk about being robbed of credit. The rhythm of dawn to dusk agriculture left little time for leisure. Meals were simple: bread, olives, maybe figs if the season allowed, and eaten quickly before trudging back to the fields. And remember, you weren't exempt if you were pregnant. In fact, pregnant women were expected to keep working, only slowing down when labor pains forced them home. Historians debate whether wealthier women in cities escaped this grind. Some argue that upper-class Athenian women were largely confined indoors, their physical suffering tied more to isolation than field labor. But for the majority, the rural women, the field was both a workplace and a cage of necessity. Joke 3. Picture telling your family you want to work from home. In 5th century BC Athens, they'd probably hand you a hoe and say, "Great, start with the garden." As the sun climbs higher, sweat beads across your brow, and your stomach aches for more than a scrap of bread. But there's no rest yet. The hidden suffering of women workers is stitched into every furrow of soil, every basket lifted, every dawn greeted with weary feet. The sun has barely crested the horizon, and already your shoulders ache. But just when you think you can rest, you return indoors to face one of the most relentless tasks of all: grinding grain. Forget shiny kitchens and food processors. Your workplace is a dark, smoky storeroom. Your tools nothing more than a rough stone quern and another smaller stone worn smooth from years of scraping. Mainstream fact: in ancient Greece, grinding grain was almost always women's work. The bread that sustained Greek diets began here, in dim rooms where women spent hours bent over stones, turning kernels into flour by sheer muscle. Ancient writers mention bread often, yet rarely acknowledge the sore backs and raw hands that made it possible. Picture it: a woman kneeling on rush mats, rocking the handstone rhythmically back and forth over grain. Each scrape releases a faint dust cloud, coating her hair, lashes, and clothes in a chalky film. The room smells faintly nutty, like crushed wheat, but also of sweat and smoke. Every household depended on this grinding. Without it, there was no bread, no sustenance. Quirky tidbit: archaeologists analyzing ancient quernstones discovered deep grooves carved into the surfaces after decades of use. In some households, women may have spent 4 or more hours a day grinding, which adds up to nearly 1/3 of their lives spent hunched over grain. Imagine telling someone today, "Yes, I commute, sleep, and grind flour. That's basically my existence." Historians still argue whether women always did this themselves, or if wealthier households used enslaved women for the task. Some believe hand grinding was so essential that nearly every woman, rich or poor, did it daily, while others think elites avoided it by outsourcing. Either way, the burden fell on women, not men. Joke 1. The closest modern equivalent might be your coffee grinder breaking and someone telling you to crush beans with a brick every morning. That's a mood killer before work. The physical toll was immense. Knees pressed into the floor, shoulders straining, wrists numbing with repetitive motion. Many ancient skeletons of women show spine deformities and joint stress consistent with a lifetime of grinding. No ergonomic stools, no breaks for stretching, just endless, bone-rattling repetition. Quirky tidbit: some folklore suggests that women sang or hummed as they ground grain, turning drudgery into rhythm. These work songs, half lullaby and half chant, might have been the only way to mark time in such monotonous labor. Imagine an entire city where dawn was greeted not just with roosters, but with the drone of women's voices keeping pace with their querns. Joke 2. It's like an ancient gym membership you never asked for. Congratulations, your arms will get toned, but only because your family wants bread. The flour itself wasn't silky white. It was coarse, flecked with husks and small grit from the stone. Eating bread sometimes meant slowly grinding your teeth away too. Archaeologists have found Greek teeth worn flat from consuming flour laced with stone dust. So the work was painful, and the product literally ground down everyone's smiles. Historians debate whether the invention of larger communal mills in later centuries relieved women of some of this burden. In classical Greece, however, the hand quern ruled. Each household, each morning, ground its portion of grain. If a woman's arms failed, the family starved. Joke 3. Honestly, next time you grab a slice of bread, whisper a quiet, "Thank you," to an ancient woman's sore shoulders. She earned it. And so, hidden from epic tales and civic records, women's lives were shaped by this daily grind, literal, not metaphorical. The clatter of stone on stone was the heartbeat of survival, and the sound of unseen suffering, echoing in every Greek household. Your shoulders may still ache from the grindstone, but now a different chore calls, one less glamorous than fetching ambrosia like a Greek goddess. You hoist a heavy amphora onto your hip, or balance it awkwardly on your head, and trudge toward the village well or the nearest spring. No running taps, no plumbing, no cute little copper sink. If you want water in an ancient Greek household, someone, almost always a woman, has to fetch it. Mainstream fact: in Athens and many other city-states, water sources were not usually inside homes. Women and girls were responsible for hauling water from public fountains or wells, sometimes several times a day. The chore was so iconic that vase paintings frequently depict women carrying amphorae, frozen forever in the act of trudging. Picture it: the cool morning air thick with dust, streets narrow and uneven, sandals slipping on loose pebbles. The amphora weighs 40 to 50 pounds when full, and you're balancing it while sidestepping donkeys, goats, and gossiping neighbors. Every step feels like dragging a boulder, yet the family back home needs water for cooking, washing, drinking, and, let's not forget, the endless grinding and weaving. Quirky tidbit: some fountains became social hubs, where women exchanged stories, gossiped about neighbors, or quietly arranged marriages. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a coffee shop, except instead of sipping cappuccinos, you were sweating under a clay jug. Historians still argue whether wealthy households sent enslaved women for water, while poorer households did the work themselves. Either way, someone's shoulders bore the burden, and it was rarely, if ever, a man's. Joke 1. Imagine telling your teenager to take out the trash, and instead, they're responsible for hauling the family's entire water supply uphill every morning. Suddenly, garbage duty doesn't sound so bad. The amphora itself was not designed for ergonomic comfort. Long, slender handles dug into fingers. Rounded bottoms meant you couldn't set it down without a stand. Some women balanced them on their heads with remarkable grace, walking upright like human cranes. Others hugged them to their chest, staggering under the weight. And when the amphora cracked or slipped, that was a family disaster, both expensive and embarrassing. Quirky tidbit: there are fragments of ancient plays that poke fun at women chatting endlessly at fountains. Men saw it as idle chatter. Women probably saw it as the one brief reprieve from the grindstone and loom, a stolen hour of conversation while waiting in line for water. Joke 2. It's almost comforting to realize that even in 500 BC, people were already rolling their eyes at long lines at the water source. Some things never change. The walk back was no easier. Sun climbing higher, amphora sloshing, shoulders bruised. Sometimes, girls as young as 6 or 7 helped their mothers, training early in the art of balancing weight. This was survival training. Forget Spartan spears. Water fetching was its own kind of endurance sport. Historians debate whether city infrastructure, like Athens' elaborate fountain houses, was built more for civic pride or genuine relief for women's labor. Marble fountains looked lovely, but the weight of water was still the same. Some scholars argue the architecture celebrated male civic identity more than it eased women's burden. Joke 3. If ancient Greece had gym memberships, men would lift stones at the palestra, while women could just cancel their subscription. They were already doing Olympic-level weightlifting every morning. And so, water was carried, day after day, shoulder after aching shoulder. No poet immortalized the effort, no temple celebrated the feat, yet without this hidden labor, there would be no bread, no wine, no clean household. Every amphora carried was another invisible victory of survival. The amphora is finally set down in the corner, sloshing softly as though mocking your tired arms. But there's no pause. Another rhythm calls you, the steady click and thump of the loom. Weaving, spinning, mending, the soundtrack of an ancient Greek woman's life. If the grindstone broke your shoulders, the loom would take your spine. Mainstream fact: weaving was central to women's labor in ancient Greece. Nearly every household required cloth for clothing, bedding, and trade. Women spun wool, dyed yarn, and wove endless lengths of fabric on upright looms. Even mythology reflected this reality. Penelope, weaving by lamplight, became a symbol of female endurance and cleverness. Picture it, a dim room filled with the smell of lanolin and dye, rows of taut threads stretched on a tall wooden frame. Your fingers fly, nodding, passing, beating the shuttle back and forth. Each mistake means undoing hours of work, so concentration is constant. The wool is coarse, the colors muted, indigo, saffron, russet, but every thread is a line in the ledger of survival. Quirky tidbit: archaeologists have found loom weights with fingerprints still pressed into the clay. Imagine some woman shaping them thousands of years ago, not realizing her weary hands would be immortalized in museums one day. Historians still argue whether weaving was entirely domestic, or if women contributed significantly to larger-scale textile economies. Some scholars believe women's woven goods were traded far and wide, quietly fueling markets, while others think most weaving stayed within households. Either way, the labor was constant and rarely acknowledged by male historians of the time. Joke 1. Picture telling an ancient Greek woman, "Don't worry, one day machines will weave all our clothes." She might drop her shuttle and ask where to sign up. The loom wasn't just about fabric, it was about identity. A woman's skill in weaving could raise her marriage prospects. Girls were trained from childhood, spinning wool as soon as their fingers were steady. Every family gathering, every festival, required garments. Without women at the loom, the polis would be shivering in rags. Quirky tidbit: in some households, dyeing wool meant stomping it barefoot in vats of pungent liquid. A glamorous image: your elegant peplos begins as someone's smelly foot bath. Joke 2. It's a reminder that behind every gorgeous ancient robe was probably one teenager saying, "Ugh, Mom, do I really have to stomp this batch again?" The monotony was crushing. Day after day, thread after thread. Songs or stories might accompany the work, but mostly it was silence broken only by the thunk of the loom weights. And if you had children, you worked with them clinging to your skirts, or tried to weave while they napped on folded wool. Historians debate whether upper-class women wove themselves or directed enslaved women to do it. Some argue even noble women were expected to weave, as part of their domestic virtue, while others think the wealthiest escaped it. Either way, in homes across Greece, cloth came from female fingers. Joke 3. Honestly, when modern folks say, "I knit to relax," an ancient Greek woman would probably snort. "Relax? This is my full-time job, my part-time job, and my overtime shift." So you weave and weave, thread after thread, cloth piling slowly but never enough. The loom binds you as surely as the amphora strap, a silent testimony to labor that clothed a civilization, one weary woman at a time. The threads on the loom may hum like a relentless metronome, but another task waits, and it smells less of wool and more of onions. In the smoky hearth corner of the house, you crouch to prepare meals, not a banquet for philosophers, just the plain sustenance that keeps bodies moving through the grind. Cooking, in ancient Greece, was no glamorous art. It was heat, smoke, sore knees, and endless repetition. Mainstream fact: women were almost always responsible for preparing food in Greek households. Meals were simple: bread, porridge, olives, lentils, onions, and occasionally fish. Meat was rare outside of festivals. The work was constant: soaking beans, kneading dough, tending embers. While men dined reclining in symposia, women labored over clay pots and smoky fires, unseen and unsung. Picture it: you kneel before a low hearth, coaxing embers to life with a reed straw, smoke stinging your eyes. Clay pots blackened with soot line the stones, while a wicker basket holds onions and garlic. The air is thick, hot, and choking. Sweat prickles your neck even in winter. Kneeling on the rough floor grinds into your knees, but the porridge won't stir itself. Quirky tidbit: archaeologists have found carbonized loaves of bread in ancient ovens, perfectly preserved after fires. They look like something you could nibble today, if you don't mind chewing on 2,000 years of ash. Historians still argue whether women had complete control over the kitchen or whether enslaved servants took the brunt of cooking in wealthier homes. Some sources suggest elite women supervised rather than cooked, though even then, they were tied to the rhythms of the kitchen. Joke 1. Imagine being an ancient Greek woman watching a cooking show. Today we're making roasted lamb with figs. You'd probably roll your eyes and mutter, "Sure, if I win the lottery." The fire itself was temperamental. Without chimneys, smoke clung to rafters and walls, staining them black. Your eyes watered constantly, and your clothes reeked of smoke. Cooking was as much an endurance test as grinding grain or weaving cloth. Quirky tidbit: one recipe calls for using wine lees, the sediment left after fermentation, as a seasoning. Basically, the waste not philosophy meant even dregs became flavoring. Joke 2. Think of it as ancient Greek ketchup. Just throw some wine sludge on it, kids, it'll taste fine. Cooking also meant cleaning. Scraping soot off pots, rinsing vessels with fetched water, and sweeping ash from the hearth floor. And unlike modern kitchens, there were no counters, no easy storage. Every pot and ladle had to be hauled, washed, and replaced day after endless day. Historians debate whether communal cooking spaces existed in poorer neighborhoods, where women might have shared tasks. Some evidence suggests shared ovens were used, meaning you had the joy of both labor and local gossip. Joke 3. Imagine waiting in line at the neighborhood oven, clay pot in hand, muttering, "If she burns her bread again, I swear." So, cooking bound women to the hearth as surely as the loom. Smoke-stung eyes, singed fingers, aching knees, all part of the hidden suffering that filled kitchens across ancient Greece. And when the family ate? Rarely did anyone thank the weary woman who had coaxed survival from smoke and clay. The hearth may cool after supper, but your body never does. There's laundry to scrub, and in ancient Greece, it wasn't done with a machine humming in the background while you sip tea. No, it meant stooping at basins or streams, plunging your arms into cold water, and scrubbing until your knuckles burned. Mainstream fact: washing clothes in ancient Greece fell squarely into the realm of women's work. Textiles needed constant care. Wool garments were heavy and absorbed sweat, oils, and dirt quickly. Without soap as we know it, women relied on lye made from wood ash, or pungent substances like urine, which acted as natural ammonia. Yes, you read that correctly, urine. Picture it: you're bent over a clay basin filled with chilly water, pounding woolen tunics against a wooden board. The smell of ash and sour liquid curls into your nose. your hands chapped red and raw, nails soft from soaking. And behind you? A pile of more garments waiting their turn. Laundry was a Sisyphean task. Finish one heap, and another appeared. Quirky tidbit. In some places, laundry was a social activity. Women gathered at communal washing spots along rivers or public basins, scrubbing while gossip flowed freely. It was the ancient Greek equivalent of a laundromat meetup, except without spin cycles or detergent pods. Historians still argue whether elite women ever washed clothes themselves or if enslaved women bore the brunt of it. Some scholars believe that even noble households might involve the mistress in overseeing washing, because poorly cleaned wool could ruin garments. Others think upper-class women barely touched the suds. Joke 1. Imagine explaining to an ancient Greek woman that in the future, people would toss clothes into a metal box, push a button, and walk away. She'd probably squint at you and say, "And you still complain about laundry?" The physicality of the chore wore women down. Hauling water for rinsing, wringing out sodden cloth until it dripped, then lugging it outdoors to dry in the sun. Clotheslines sagged under the weight of tunics, cloaks, and bedding. In winter, wet garments stiffened like boards in the cold, a mocking reminder that the work was never seasonal, it was endless. Quirky tidbit. Some ancient comedic plays reference women scolding their children for getting clothes dirty too quickly, proof that mothers across millennia shared the same exasperated tone. Joke 2. Yes, the phrase, "You're not made of tunics," might have echoed through courtyards long before "You're not made of money" ever existed, even once clothes were clean, mending awaited. Wool tore easily, hems unraveled, and patchwork was a constant. Women not only cleaned garments but kept them alive stitch by stitch, prolonging their use. Fabric was precious. Waste was unthinkable. Historians debate whether professional laundresses existed in Greece, as they did in later Rome. Some inscriptions hint at specialized workers, but whether these were independent women or enslaved laborers remains unclear. Either way, the baseline truth holds. Washing was women's burden. Joke 3. If there had been a Yelp for laundresses, you'd expect reviews like, "Smells faintly less of goat, 5 stars." So, crouched by the basin, arms aching, lungs stung by ammonia fumes, you keep scrubbing. There are no statues of women washing tunics, no poems about chapped hands. Yet without the quiet persistence of laundry, Greek households would collapse into stink and ruin. The clothes may now flap in the breeze, but your workday has not ended, because the people wearing those tunics need care too. Childcare and elder care fell almost entirely to women, and in ancient Greece, that meant tending to endless needs while still juggling every other task. Mainstream fact: in most Greek households, children rarely saw their fathers except at mealtimes or festivals. Daily care, feeding, bathing, teaching simple skills, was carried out by mothers, older sisters, or female servants. Infants were often swaddled tightly and tucked into crude cradles, sometimes left near the loom or hearth while their mothers worked. Picture it: you crouched beside a clay lamp, rocking a cradle with your foot while spinning thread with your hands. A toddler tugs at your peplos hem, demanding bread, while your elderly mother coughs from the corner, asking for water. The air is thick with smoke, chatter, and fatigue. You are the axis of the household, keeping all the fragile spokes from collapsing. Quirky tidbit: some cradles were designed with rockers carved from leftover wood beams, decorated with little painted patterns. Archaeologists have even found tiny rattles made of clay, filled with pebbles, a simple toy, but one that gave babies something to grasp besides your finger. Historians still argue whether girls were sent to formal schooling or kept entirely at home, learning domestic tasks from their mothers. While boys prepared for public life, girls were trained in the silent labor of maintaining households. Some scholars think wealthy families occasionally hired tutors for daughters, but evidence is sparse. Joke 1. Picture a Greek mom saying, "My son studies rhetoric, my daughter studies fetching the chamber pot." Talk about different curriculums. Childcare meant tending not just to needs but to dangers. Fires, sharp tools, and open wells all lurked nearby. A moment's distraction could mean injury. And infants? Without modern medicine, mortality rates were high, so mothers carried both hope and fear in equal measure. Quirky tidbit: wet nurses, women hired to breastfeed other people's babies, were sometimes enslaved women, but also sometimes poor free women who needed income. Imagine the awkward job listing. Wanted, reliable, full-time lactator. Joke 2. You thought babysitting your neighbor's kid was stressful. Try being paid in olives to keep an aristocrat's newborn alive. Elder care was equally taxing. In multi-generational households, aging parents or relatives lived under the same roof, needing food, warmth, and comfort. With no nursing homes, daughters and daughters-in-law were the default caregivers. Historians debate whether extended families eased or increased the burden. Some argue more hands meant more help. Others note that more mouths to feed just piled more strain on women. The truth likely varied, depending on wealth and household size. Joke 3. Imagine a Greek woman sighing, "I take care of babies, old people, sick people, and men, basically, everyone but myself." And through it all, the cycle never paused. A child cried while you stirred porridge, an elder groaned while you mended hems, and a husband expected clean garments while you fetched water. Caregiving was invisible, unpaid, and endless, but it was the fabric that held Greek households together. The day bleeds into evening, but one task remains ever present: fetching water. No tap, no pump, no helpful kitchen faucet, just clay jars, aching arms, and long walks to the fountain house. Women carry not only the household burdens but the literal weight of survival on their shoulders. Mainstream fact: in ancient Greek cities, water was drawn from communal fountain houses, often adorned with columns and statues. Women were the primary water carriers, making multiple trips each day to fill amphorae for cooking, cleaning, bathing, and drinking. Archaeological remains of fountain houses in Athens and Corinth confirm how central they were to daily life. Picture it: you trudge along a dusty road, balancing a heavy amphora on your head, your neck muscles taut, sandals rubbing blisters into your heels. Around you, other women chatter, some laughing, some muttering complaints. The sun blazes down, reflecting off whitewashed walls, and the jar digs into your scalp like an unwelcome crown. The clink of clay jars echoes off stone as women line up for their turn at the spouts. Quirky tidbit: ancient inscriptions sometimes dedicated fountains to nymphs, suggesting that women might have whispered quick prayers while filling their jars, hoping the water spirits would grant a lighter load or fewer trips that day. Historians still argue whether elite women sent enslaved attendants to fetch water or whether all women, regardless of status, participated. Some scholars say wealthy women rarely set foot outside for such tasks, while others point to depictions in pottery showing finely dressed women at fountains, perhaps implying even aristocrats had to balance jars now and then. Joke 1. Imagine explaining bottled water to an ancient Greek woman. "So you pay extra to carry water home instead of straight from the fountain?" She'd probably laugh herself to tears. Fetching water wasn't just labor. It was also one of the few sanctioned social outings for women. Fountain houses became gathering spots, buzzing with gossip, matchmaking, and whispered news. A trip for water might take twice as long because of all the chatter, and that was probably the only pleasant part of the ordeal. Quirky tidbit. Some vase paintings depict flirtations at fountains, hinting that young men hung around, hoping to glimpse women balancing amphorae. Carrying water could double as a reluctant performance of grace and strength. Joke 2. Basically, the ancient fountain house was a mix between a grocery store and a singles bar. The physical strain, though, was no joke. An amphora could weigh 30 pounds when full, and most households required multiple jars each day. The constant hauling damaged backs, shoulders, and joints, a quiet suffering recorded only in weary bodies. Historians debate how water was rationed in drought years. Some argue that households carefully managed storage in cisterns, while others believe women simply made more trips. Either way, the solution always fell on female shoulders. Joke 3. If pedometers had existed, Greek women would have crushed every step challenge, without even trying. So, as the stars blink awake in the night sky, you stagger home, arms trembling, amphora sloshing, and shoulders aching. Tomorrow, the fountain house will wait again, and so will the endless path of clay jars and tired feet. The amphora rests at last, water sloshing gently inside, but your body is already bent toward another burden, tending animals. Chickens, goats, maybe a pig or two, all demanding attention like noisy, feathered children. Caring for household animals was another invisible labor, woven seamlessly into the endless tapestry of women's chores. Mainstream fact: many Greek households kept small livestock. Chickens provided eggs, goats gave milk, and pigs were raised for occasional meat. Women and girls often managed these animals, feeding, milking, cleaning pens, while men dealt with larger herds or market trade. Picture it: you scatter grain for a cluster of chickens pecking frantically at your feet, their claws scraping dust into your sandals. A goat bleats impatiently from its pen, tugging at the rope that restrains it. The air smells of hay and manure, your fingers sticky with grain dust, your tunic smeared with dirt. You mutter under your breath, "You eat better than I do," as the goat noses eagerly into the pail. Quirky tidbit: chickens weren't just for food, they were used in divination rituals, where the way they pecked at grain was read as a sign from the gods. So while you fed them, someone else might have been asking them cosmic questions. Historians still argue how much freedom women had to sell eggs, milk, or small livestock at local markets. Some believe women could keep a tiny portion of profits, while others insist male guardians controlled all transactions. The evidence is tantalizing but inconclusive. Joke 1. Imagine a Greek woman sneaking one egg to trade for a ribbon, whispering, "Sure, don't tell my husband. He thinks chickens are just freeloaders." Animal care was constant. Goats needed milking twice a day, chickens had to be secured at night against foxes, and pens required mucking out. In winter, keeping animals warm was another concern: straw bedding, closer proximity to the hearth, and endless vigilance. Quirky tidbit: some women sang while milking goats, turning the chore into a soft, rhythmic ritual. The goats probably appreciated the lullabies, or at least the consistency. Joke 2. Honestly, if goats could talk, they'd probably complain about the singing. Every morning, the same song. Can't we switch to Homer once in a while? But for all the fatigue, tending animals also created fleeting joys. A newborn kid stumbling on shaky legs, a hen producing her first egg, the small comfort of warm goat's milk in a clay cup, all tiny sparks in a long day of shadows. Historians debate whether women identified strongly with the animals they cared for. Some scholars suggest parallels between female labor and domesticated creatures, both essential, both controlled, both underappreciated. Others caution against overreading symbolism where practicality ruled. Joke 3. Still, you'd forgive a woman for looking at a tethered goat and thinking, "I know exactly how you feel." So you tuck the animals in, scatter the last grain, and wipe your hands on your tunic. Their bellies are full, their pens secured, and your day's work stretches behind you like a mile-long shadow. But tomorrow, clucking and bleating will rouse you again, demanding your hands, your time, and your patience. The animals are quiet now, their pens settled, but your next task glimmers faintly in the lamplight, oil lamps themselves. Household light in ancient Greece did not spring from switches or glowing screens, but from flickering flames fed by olive oil. And who trimmed, filled, and tended those lamps? Once again, the women. Mainstream fact: olive oil wasn't only for cooking. It powered light, lubricated tools, polished wood, and anointed bodies. Clay lamps were common household items, and keeping them burning was a crucial part of maintaining order after sunset. Picture it: you squat on the floor, clay lamp in your lap, carefully pouring oil from a small jug into its hollow basin. The wick, twisted fibers of linen, absorbs the liquid slowly, your fingers smelling of olives long after you're done. Strike a spark from flint, coax the flame alive, and suddenly shadows leap across the walls, chasing each other like restless spirits. Quirky tidbit: archaeologists have discovered lamps shaped like animals. Owls, fish, even pigs. Imagine setting down a little pig-shaped lamp while muttering, "At least one pig in this house doesn't squeal." Historians still argue whether lamp trimming was seen as a symbolic duty tied to women's role in guarding the household hearth. Some think lamp care was as much a ritual of protection as it was maintenance, a way to keep chaos at bay with light. Others believe it was simply another mundane task, with no hidden meaning. Joke 1. Either way, it's safe to say ancient Greek women were basically the family's unpaid electricians. The job wasn't glamorous. Olive oil could go rancid, wicks smoked if cut poorly, and soot stained walls and ceilings. Women had to trim wicks carefully to keep flames steady, lest a small fire hazard join the day's long list of anxieties. Quirky tidbit: some wealthier households used bronze or silver lamps, suspended on chains, casting a gentler glow than the clay versions. Of course, someone still had to refill them, and guess who that someone was? Joke 2. Imagine explaining LED bulbs to a Greek woman. She'd probably gasp, "You mean you don't have to smell like olives every night?" Even beyond lamps, fire demanded attention. Cooking fires had to be kept safe, embers banked, hearths swept clean. A stray spark could ruin everything, so vigilance never rested. Women, therefore, lived in constant negotiation with flame, feeding it, controlling it, fearing it. Historians debate whether tending the lamp had religious resonance with Hestia, goddess of the hearth. Some suggest women's nightly act of trimming and lighting echoed broader rituals of communal hearths in city life. Others dismiss this as over-romanticizing simple housework. Joke 3. Still, if your lamp kept sputtering out, you'd probably whisper a quick prayer to Hestia, just in case. So you set the lamps around the room, tiny circles of light against the night's heavy dark. The children drowse, the elders mumble, and the house glows faintly with warmth. You sigh, rubbing oil from your fingertips, knowing that even the light here is borrowed from your labor. The lamps glow faintly, but your hands are restless still, because the loom is waiting. Weaving was not simply a craft in ancient Greece. It was the quiet heartbeat of household survival, and almost every woman's life was threaded through with wool, spindle, and loom weights. Mainstream fact: Greek women produced nearly all household textiles. From spinning wool into yarn to weaving cloth on upright looms, the work consumed countless hours. Even aristocratic women, like those in Homer's epics, are shown weaving. Penelope famously used her loom as both duty and strategy. Picture it: you stand before a tall, wooden loom in the corner of the room, strings of warped threads dangling like pale waterfalls. Weighted stones tug them taut, while your shuttle passes in and out, weaving the weft line by line. The room is hushed except for the gentle clack of wood and the faint swish of thread. Your shoulders ache, but your mind drifts in rhythm. Quirky tidbit: some loom weights were decorated with little faces or symbols, almost like secret companions watching over the work. Perhaps they gave comfort during long hours of solitude at the loom. Historians still argue whether weaving was truly honored as a symbol of women's virtue or whether that praise was just a polite cover for relentless, underappreciated labor. Was Penelope's weaving admired, or simply taken for granted as what women did? The truth may lie in both interpretations. Joke 1. Imagine telling an ancient Greek woman about fast fashion. She'd blink at you and say, "Wait, you mean you buy a tunic already made? And then throw it away?" She'd probably faint on the spot. The loom dominated life. Winter meant wool cloaks had to be ready. Weddings demanded new garments. Offerings for temples required fine cloth. A woman's weaving output was expected to clothe her entire household. The process was endless: carding fleece, spinning yarn, dyeing fibers, weaving, repairing, reweaving. Quirky tidbit: ancient Greek dye colors came from natural sources: saffron for yellow, madder root for red, and expensive murex sea snails for purple. Imagine the patience required to crush thousands of snails just to color one garment. Joke 2. Somewhere out there, a woman was definitely muttering, "Purple is lovely, but is it worth smelling like rotten seafood for 3 weeks?" The loom wasn't only work, it was also metaphor. Greek poets and playwrights used weaving imagery to describe fate, politics, even storytelling itself. Women wove literal fabric, but men borrowed their labor as metaphor for cosmic order. Historians debate whether women found power in weaving as a communal skill. Some argue that weaving circles built solidarity among women. Others suggest it reinforced their isolation, keeping them confined indoors. Joke 3. Either way, the loom didn't exactly offer PTO. The only vacation you got was if the wool ran out. So you pushed the shuttle once more, threads tightening into cloth, knowing this fabric will cloak someone else, your husband, your children, perhaps even the servant tending goats. The loom sings its quiet song of necessity, and you remain tethered to it long past fatigue. The cloth grows inch by inch on the loom, but the rhythm is broken when a neighbor calls from the threshold, "Tomorrow, it's time to help with the harvest." Whether olives, grapes, or barley, seasonal labor pulled women out of their homes and into the fields, where the sun bore down and the work stretched for hours. Mainstream fact: ancient Greek agriculture relied heavily on women's labor during harvest times. They picked olives, gathered grapes for pressing, and collected grain by hand. Evidence from vase paintings and literary references shows women in fields alongside men, though rarely mentioned in official records. Picture it: the dawn breaks, golden light spilling across the groves. You wrap your himation tightly, sandals crunching on the rocky soil as you join other women beneath the silvery leaves of olive trees. The air smells of dust and resin. Baskets lie ready, woven from reeds, waiting to be filled. Your fingers ache within minutes, scraping bark, tugging stubborn olives, as cicadas hum overhead. Quirky tidbit: olives were sometimes knocked down with sticks, a practice that bruised both fruit and fingers. Imagine dodging wayward olives pelting you from above, like a low-budget hailstorm you didn't sign up for. Historians still argue whether women were compensated directly for harvest work or if it was folded into household obligations. Some claim they could earn wages, especially poorer women hired by wealthier landowners, while others believe payment rarely reached their hands. Joke 1. Imagine your boss today paying you in exposure instead of money. Well, for harvest women, it was literally exposure to the blazing Mediterranean sun. The grape harvest brought its own flavor of fatigue. Women plucked clusters, stained their hands purple, and sometimes joined in the pressing, bare feet stomping rhythmically in vats, juice splashing up their calves. It sounds festive in plays and poems, but the reality was sticky, exhausting, and never-ending. Quirky tidbit: some women sang songs while treading grapes, turning work into a communal chant. Maybe it helped, maybe it just distracted from the fact that grape juice was seeping into every cut on your feet. Joke 2. And yes, in case you're wondering, you probably never want to think too hard about hygiene in ancient winemaking. Let's just say it had earthy undertones. Harvests weren't optional. A failed olive or grape season could mean shortages of oil or wine, two cornerstones of Greek diet and trade. Women's role in securing those supplies was critical, though their names rarely appear in the accounts. Historians debate how much of this work was ritualized. Some scholars suggest women's presence in harvest scenes connected them symbolically to fertility and the land. Others argue that symbolism was retrofitted later, and the women were simply needed because more hands meant more olives. Joke 3. Either way, the olive tree didn't care about poetry. It just wanted its fruit picked. So you gather olives until your basket is heavy, then another, and another. By dusk your back is hunched, your arms scratched, and your sandals stained. The village hums with weary voices, women trudging home, their labor hidden behind the jars of oil and amphorae of wine that will stock cellars for winter. The harvest dust still clings to your clothes when the next duty calls, not rest, but craftwork. For while the fields test your back, the workshops test your fingers. Women in ancient Greece often labored in cottage industries, supporting potters, textile merchants, and artisans with small but vital contributions. Mainstream fact: archaeological finds suggest women helped with pottery production, smoothing clay, painting simpler motifs, or carrying finished wares to be fired. In some towns, inscriptions hint at women's involvement in textile sales and minor crafts. Picture it: you crouch beside a low bench, smoothing wet clay with a damp cloth. A potter shapes the vessel while you handle the detail work, coaxing the surface into evenness. Clay dust coats your hands, gets into your nails, and dries your skin until it cracks. When the kiln roars to life, you carry jars carefully, the heat licking your face as you try not to drop anything. Quirky tidbit: some pottery shards bear fingerprints, quite possibly women's, as they were the ones handling vessels before firing. Imagine your fingerprint lasting 2,500 years, while your name vanishes completely. Historians still argue whether women were recognized as artisans in their own right, or if their work was masked under male masters' names. Evidence of independent female potters is scarce, but not impossible. Some fragments show stylistic quirks hinting at hands not formally trained. Joke 1. Maybe one woman snuck a doodle of a donkey into a vase border, giggling while thinking, "Centuries from now, no one will know it was me." Textile crafts were another steady drain. Women didn't just weave for their own homes. Some produced cloth for sale, dyed yarn for neighbors, or spun thread for workshops. Their labor expanded into the market economy, though rarely acknowledged formally. Quirky tidbit: inscriptions from Delos mention women renting workshop spaces for weaving, proof that at least some women organized small-scale businesses, even if history filed them away in the margins. Joke 2. Imagine being a Greek dad watching your daughter's workshop thrive. I told her weaving was a waste of time. Now she's paying my rent. And let's not forget fish gutting or salt curing in port towns. Women salted anchovies, laid out drying nets, or cleaned fish at market stalls. The smell lingered for days, clinging to skin and clothes, but the work kept families afloat, literally. Historians debate how widespread women's economic autonomy was. Some scholars argue most women operated only within household contexts. Others point to inscriptions and contracts showing surprising independence. Joke 3. Either way, you can picture a woman at the port muttering, "Call me unfree all you like, just don't call me late for payday." So the crafts continue: pots smoothed, cloth dyed, fish salted. Small works that added up to survival. Each item bore your invisible fingerprints, weaving women's labor into the very fabric, sometimes literally, of Greek society, even if their names never made it onto the contract. Even when the workshops quieted and the fields lay bare, women's work never truly ended, because the children were always there, clinging, crying, tugging at hems while their mothers ground grain, hauled water, or threaded looms. Child-rearing was not separate from labor. It was tangled into every task, doubling the burden and stretching days into an endless loop. Mainstream fact: in ancient Greece, childcare was overwhelmingly the duty of women, mothers, older sisters, enslaved nursemaids. Infants were breastfed for up to 2 years, and toddlers often followed mothers to work. Poorer households could not afford dedicated caregivers, so babies were set down in baskets or tied to the hip while their mothers worked. Picture it: you crouch at the millstone, turning it slowly with aching arms, while your infant squirms beside you in a straw basket. The baby chews on a scrap of cloth, gurgling one moment, shrieking the next. You shush gently, push the stone, check the baby, and return to grinding, the tasks overlapping until you barely remember which you began first. Quirky tidbit: archaeologists have found tiny feeding vessels shaped like animals, little clay pigs or birds, that may have been used as baby bottles. Imagine the mixed feelings of exhaustion and amusement as you try to calm a fussy child with a pig-shaped cup. Historians still argue whether child-rearing in poor families allowed for shared mothering, with older siblings and neighbors pitching in, or whether women were essentially tethered alone to both domestic and economic tasks. The truth likely varied by community. Joke 1. Either way, the phrase, "It takes a village," probably began as, "It takes a village, but they're all conveniently busy when the baby cries." Children were present even in public work. At the marketplace, a toddler might cling to a mother's himation as she sold surplus figs. In the fields, older children picked olives or grapes alongside adults, their small hands quick but easily tired. Some mothers tucked infants into shaded spots while bending to labor, hoping the breeze kept flies at bay. Quirky tidbit: some terracotta figurines depict women balancing baskets on their heads with babies slung at their waist, an ancient snapshot of multitasking immortalized in clay. Joke 2. Multitasking has been around forever. The only difference is that today you might be answering emails while stirring soup, instead of spinning yarn while breastfeeding. The constant overlap of labor and child care meant that women rarely rested. Even nighttime offered little relief, with babies crying and toddlers stirring, while lamps needed trimming and bread needed baking for the dawn. Historians debate how much freedom older children gave women once they were old enough to help. Some argue it eased mothers' burdens. Others note that high child mortality kept women perpetually caring for infants, with little reprieve. Joke 3. You might say women had no empty nest syndrome, only a forever full basket syndrome. So you continue, weaving cloth with a child tugging your sleeve, or stirring a pot while singing a lullaby. Labor and child rearing are inseparable, braided together like the threads on the loom. The children grow, but the work never fades, and the cycle repeats itself with relentless, weary familiarity. The rhythm of work continues, but your body begins to protest. The endless strain of grinding grain, hauling water, weaving cloth, and tending children leaves its mark: aches in joints, swollen feet, tired eyes. Hidden behind the facade of household routine, sickness and injury stalk women quietly, unspoken but ever present. Mainstream fact: ancient Greek women had little access to medical care, and much of their health burden went undocumented. Malnutrition from limited diets, anemia from constant pregnancies, and injuries from labor were common. Surviving skeletal remains often show worn joints and spinal stress consistent with heavy, repetitive tasks. Picture it: you rise in the morning with stiffness in your back, a dull throb in your shoulders. Your hands, cracked from clay and grain dust, sting when you plunge them into the wash basin. The lamps flicker as you try to stand, the room tilting for a moment before you push forward, because work does not pause for pain. Quirky tidbit: some women turn to folk remedies, garlic poultices, honey salves, or amulets strung with protective charms. Archaeologists have uncovered tiny terracotta figurines of body parts left as votive offerings at healing shrines. Imagine dropping off a clay model of your aching knee at a temple and muttering, "Please fix this before harvest season." Historians still argue whether female illness was seen as a personal failing or as an unavoidable byproduct of hard labor. Texts by Hippocrates and others often dismissed women's complaints as hysteria or tied them exclusively to reproductive functions, leaving physical injuries invisible. Joke 1. Imagine telling your physician, "My back hurts from hauling amphorae." He'd probably reply, "Clearly your uterus is wandering again." Fatigue was constant. Women rarely enjoyed days of rest, and religious festivals, though festive, still demanded ceremonial labor, food preparation, and ritual duties. Malnutrition compounded exhaustion, since poorer diets meant less protein and fewer vitamins. Bread, olives, and figs sustained life, but left many lacking iron or calcium. Quirky tidbit: one ancient cure for exhaustion was to drink diluted wine mixed with herbs. It probably didn't restore your energy, but at least you forgot how tired you were. Joke 2. Somewhere, a woman surely muttered, "If another man prescribes wine for my backache, I'm pouring it on his head instead of drinking it." Injuries, too, went untreated: burns from ovens, cuts from fish bones, twisted ankles from rocky paths. Women endured them quietly, layering work atop pain, because there was no alternative. Historians debate whether communal healing knowledge among women provided a safety net. Some scholars highlight networks of midwives and herbalists. Others argue that survival often depended on luck and resilience alone. Joke 3. Maybe the real Greek god of health wasn't Asclepius, but whichever neighbor handed you garlic paste and said, "Rub this on it, trust me." So the days pass, aches deepening into part of life's texture. You haul water with sore shoulders, weave with stiff fingers, sing to your children while ignoring the throb in your joints. Illness is not crisis. It is background music, quiet but constant, woven into the hidden suffering of women whose work never truly paused. The body bends, the hands ache, the breath shortens, but what of the law, the mighty system that claimed to govern all of Greek life? For women, especially working women, the law offered little shelter. It recognized property, contracts, and citizenship, but their labor and suffering passed unrecorded, folded into the invisible corners of family life. Mainstream fact: in Athens, women were legally under the authority of a male guardian, the Kyrios, a father, husband, or even a son if widowed. They could not vote, represent themselves in court, or hold formal contracts without male oversight. Their economic contributions, though essential, were never formally acknowledged. Picture it: you watch men gather in the agora, debating loudly about civic duties, taxes, and grain shipments. Your own baskets of olives and jars of oil, prepared through months of labor, might be taxed or traded, but your name will never appear on the records. You are the silent hand behind the goods, but the law writes only men's signatures. Quirky tidbit: there were a few loopholes. Widows, especially wealthy ones, sometimes found ways to manage estates quietly through male proxies. Inscriptions from Delos even hint at women leasing workshops, though usually under carefully worded legal disguises. Historians still argue whether these rare cases were anomalies or broader evidence of hidden female agency. Some suggest women carved out gray zones of autonomy. Others insist the system remained rigid, with exceptions proving the rule. Joke 1. Imagine filling out ancient Greek tax paperwork, then realizing you're legally invisible. Convenient if you don't want to pay, less convenient if you want your hard work recognized. Sparta, of course, stood apart. Spartan women enjoyed greater freedom, owning land, running households, and training physically. But even there, the law framed their freedoms around serving the state's military machine, not protecting their well-being. Quirky tidbit: some Spartan women reportedly used their status to mock men who returned from battle alive but defeated. It was empowerment, but with a sharp edge, born from a society where women's authority was tied to producing warriors. Joke 2. So, in Sparta, your pep talk to your husband was less good luck, and more don't come back unless you win. In Athens, the law's silence meant that women injured at work had no legal recourse. If you burned your hand baking bread or broke your back hauling water, the courts did not care. Your suffering belonged to the household, and the household belonged to a man. Historians debate whether enslaved women fared worse or simply differently. Some scholars argue enslaved women had no protections whatsoever. Others note that rare contracts show masters facing penalties for mistreatment, though such rules were rarely enforced. Joke 3. Basically, the law was like a poorly written customer service policy. Lots of clauses, but none that actually help when your loom collapses on you. So you live beneath a legal code that values your work only as an extension of someone else's authority. Your labor oils the gears of society, but the law leaves you a ghost, present in every jar of grain, every woven cloak, yet absent from every courtroom scroll. If the laws ignored you, perhaps the festivals offered a reprieve, or at least the illusion of one. Religious life in ancient Greece revolved around processions, sacrifices, and rituals, and women, especially working women, played vital roles. But even these rare moments of public participation often masked more labor than leisure. Their celebrations, requiring hours of preparation before any joy could seep through. Mainstream fact: festivals like the Thesmophoria, honoring Demeter, demanded women's presence and organization. Married women prepared offerings, maintained ritual purity, and carried out symbolic tasks like scattering pig remains into pits to ensure fertility of the fields. Picture it: you rise before dawn, gathering baskets of figs, barley, and tiny loaves baked specially for the goddess. Your fingers smell of smoke from tending the hearth fire all night, and your clothes bear streaks of flour. As the sun peaks above the hills, you join other women in a slow procession, the weight of offerings pressing into your shoulders. Quirky tidbit: during the Thesmophoria, women camped out together for several days, away from their husbands and households. Scholars suggest this may have been one of the few times women could enjoy community with one another without male oversight. Imagine the whispers, the laughter, and the gossip traded like treasures around the fire. Historians still argue whether these festivals gave women genuine agency or were simply another form of duty dressed up as religious honor. Were you empowered, or simply exhausted in a new setting? The debate lingers. Joke 1, perhaps you sighed. A vacation from the household. Only to realize your vacation involved digging pits and carrying pig bones. Not quite the spa weekend you imagined. Other festivals offered more theatrical roles. At weaving festivals for Athena, women presented intricately woven pepli, robes, to drape over statues. The public display of textiles meant recognition, but also pressure. Your weaving represented not just yourself, but your family's honor. Quirky tidbit: some pepli were woven with scenes of gods defeating giants, a curious irony since the very real giants, your endless chores, remained undefeated back home. Joke 2, you might glance at Athena's statue and mutter, "Nice robe, goddess. Now how about sending someone to grind my grain?" Even festivals of Dionysus, with their parades and dramas, demanded labor, preparing wreaths, mixing wine, cooking food for gatherings. Women contributed to the Bacchic revelry, but beneath the rhythm of drums and dancing lay sore feet and tired hands. Historians debate whether festivals were times of genuine relief from domestic drudgery or cleverly disguised reinforcements of women's roles. Some argue the communal nature offered solidarity. Others claim it only expanded the workload under divine supervision. Joke 3, either way, you left festivals more tired than when you arrived. Proof that even your holidays had overtime. So the festivals came and went, their bright colors and processions blending into memories. They offered flickers of freedom, laughter in the shadows, but never erased the weight of constant labor. Even joy had a price, and women paid it in sweat, smoke, and weary feet. When words fail, objects remain. Centuries later, archaeologists crouch in dusty trenches and sift through soil, uncovering the tools that once filled your hands, silent witnesses to the endless hours of work performed by women across ancient Greece. These artifacts whisper stories louder than any courtroom record or polished speech in the agora. Mainstream fact: excavations at sites such as Olympus and Athens have unearthed loom weights, spindle whorls, grinding stones, and clay ovens. These everyday objects paint a vivid picture of women's labor, even when texts remained silent. A loom weight, simple and unadorned, could represent hundreds of hours of weaving. Picture it: in the dim interior of a mud-brick house, you reach for a heavy stone quern, pressing grain into flour with aching arms. That very stone, worn smooth by your hands, may one day rest behind glass in a museum, admired by strangers who will never feel the sting of flour dust in their lungs. Quirky tidbit: some loom weights bear doodles or tiny decorations, smiling faces, simple animals, suggesting that even in monotony, women left personal marks, tiny rebellions of creativity etched into utilitarian tools. Historians still argue whether these decorated loom weights were just idle sketches or talismans for luck in weaving. Did a woman carve a face simply out of boredom, or was it a quiet prayer for a smoother thread? Joke 1. Imagine archaeologists marveling centuries later. What deep ritual meaning does this doodle hold? When in truth it was probably just someone's version of doodling during a long day. Other artifacts highlight the scale of work. Pottery fragments stained with oil hint at endless kitchen use. Amphorae buried in storage pits recall the hauling of water or grain. Even children's small clay toys sometimes appear alongside loom weights, suggesting that women juggled work and childcare side by side. Quirky tidbit: archaeologists have found tiny handprints in drying clay tiles, perhaps the marks of children playing at their mothers' sides while the women worked. Those fingerprints remain as faint echoes of ancient multitasking. Joke 2. You can almost picture the exasperated sigh of a mother. Stop sticking your hands in the clay. Oh, fine, whatever, it'll dry. Grinding stones, especially, bear grooves so deep they speak of years of effort. Each ridge is a scar left by the push of hands, the repetition of muscle, the grind of necessity. Historians debate whether the household tools we find belong to free women or enslaved ones, blurring lines between domestic and coerced labor. The silence of artifacts means we cannot always know whose suffering is preserved in stone and clay. Joke 3. If archaeologists ever dig up our world, they might puzzle over coffee machines and vacuum cleaners. What mysterious rituals did these devices serve? Never realizing they were just the descendants of ancient querns and looms. So the artifacts remain humble and enduring. They tell of work unrecorded in poems, absent from speeches, yet etched permanently in clay and stone. Every worn surface is a testimony. Women worked, women endured, women shaped the ancient world with tools that outlasted their names. The long arc of the story bends toward silence. Silence not only in the voices of ancient women but in the way history itself passed them by. You picture the countless figures, bent over querns, balancing water jars, weaving until their fingers blistered. Their lives built the fabric of society, yet their names rarely traveled into marble inscriptions or epic poetry. Mainstream fact: classical writers like Herodotus, Thucydides, and Xenophon spoke at length about wars, generals, and politics, but gave almost no space to the women whose daily labor sustained those very campaigns. Without their grain, bread, and cloth, armies could not march, yet the record books remain mute. Picture it: you sit at the loom, tugging the shuttle through endless rows of thread. Outside, men debate in the assembly, voices echoing. Inside, the house hums with labor, children tugging at your sleeves, bread burning in the oven if you forget. This is the heartbeat of Greek life, though no bard will sing of it. Quirky tidbit: archaeologists found graffiti scratched on a wall in Delos. A name, likely female, followed by a crude sketch of a spindle. Was it boredom? A signature of ownership? Or perhaps a stubborn declaration? I was here, and I worked. Historians still argue whether the silence is absolute or simply skewed by surviving sources. Some contend that women's oral traditions, songs, laments, stories told at night, carried their legacies, though unrecorded in ink. Others suggest the invisibility was deliberate, the erasure of labor that society depended on but preferred not to acknowledge. Joke 1. Imagine a symposium where men toasted to our glorious achievements. Meanwhile, women in the back room rolled their eyes and muttered, to the glorious laundry you'll never notice. The legacy is peculiar. Women's work shaped ancient economies, sustained households, and influenced culture, yet slipped quietly out of official memory. What remains are the grooves of grinding stones, the fingerprints in clay, the whispered references in medical texts, and the scattered mentions of midwives, healers, and market women. Quirky tidbit: some ancient tombstones for women honor them primarily as good weavers. A modest epitaph, but perhaps an accurate reflection of how society valued their contribution, or, perhaps, the only way it had language to describe them. Joke 2. Not exactly the glamorous afterlife inscription you'd hoped for. Here lies so-and-so, undefeated champion of laundry. And yet these women mattered. Their hidden suffering, their ceaseless effort, their quiet endurance wove the fabric of Greece itself. Without them, no polis could thrive, no army could march, no marketplace could bustle. The silence of history does not erase their impact, it only deepens the responsibility to remember. Historians still argue whether the modern imagination can truly recover these lives, or if they are destined to remain half-seen through fragments. But as long as we picture them, hands dusty with flour, backs bent under amphorae, voices humming laments into the dark, they live again, at least in whispered memory. Joke 3. Maybe, just maybe, the next time someone brags about Greek achievements, you'll smile knowingly and say, "Yes, but have you thanked the women who hauled the water?" So the story closes, not with triumph, but with a reminder. The hidden suffering of women in ancient Greece was also the hidden strength that sustained it. They are ghosts in the record, but anchors in the truth. And now, as the echoes of stone querns and loom weights fade, let the noise of history soften into a whisper. You've walked through fields at dawn, carried water under a heavy sun, stood at the loom beside flickering lamps. You've seen the quiet endurance of women whose names we've lost, yet whose labor lingers in every fragment left behind. Let that weight slip from your shoulders. Imagine the baskets and jars set down, the grinding stones stilled. The house grows quiet, the children finally asleep, the hearth embers glowing faintly. The streets of Athens, once noisy with shouts and footsteps, settle into silence beneath the stars. The only sound is the soft creak of rope on a well bucket, swinging gently in the night breeze. Breathe slowly. The dust of the day settles, drifting to the earth like flowers shaken from a sieve. The lamps flicker lower, shadows lengthening, then dissolving into calm. Even the voices of the gods, so often demanding, seem distant, muffled, content to let you rest. Picture a soft cot laid with woven blankets, cool air brushing your face from an open doorway. The burdens of work fall away, one by one, as though set gently into a clay jar and sealed for the night. Your breath deepens, matching the rhythm of the world's quieting heartbeat. I in this stillness, you are no longer invisible. You are remembered, cherished, and finally free of toil. Let the story dissolve into dream, carrying with it the strength and endurance of those who came before. Rest now. The night is yours,